Hey guys, welcome to another video. So this channel, I'm planning on transitioning slightly from the higher workload, rarer educational pseudo-animated videos that I've been doing to more kind of recorded in real time, scriptless, less researched, uh, still educational videos regarding simpler things that I have a better understanding of. In this case, I'm gonna be part of a series I do on digital painting, following my progress as well as hopefully helping you guys learn as well how to advance in digital painting. I figured as a good first start, we would actually start with the self-portrait I just did. Not just did, but the self-portrait I did as part of a project for my art Discord server, which you are welcome to join. There will be a description. There will be a link in the description below. It's open to any teenagers who are interested in art. The teenager, you can't be a little kid, and you can't be like if you're like 20 or like 18, 19, 20, that's fine, but you can't be like an adult. It's a place for younger people who don't necessarily have the money or the resources or just the availability for attending an in-person art community, and even people who do have those things to just have a quick resource to bounce ideas off of one another, communicate, collaborate, interact, and just be an overall positive experience. That's enough self-promotion. The point of that is that recently we did a challenge, not a challenge, but an event where everybody is going to be drawing a self-portrait. And this is mine. I did this in Art Studio Pro on the iPad Pro. This is actually my favorite drawing program, drawing setup. I have the stuff to do like Clip Studio Paint on the PC, but quite frankly, I really enjoy the iPad Pro far more. It's much more convenient. I like touch gestures. I like being able to pinch and zoom and do whatever you need to do that way. It is my personal favorite way to operate with my digital painting. And I think that I will probably do a video in the future discussing more in depth exactly what you need to start digital painting. Hint, it's not much, but this is the setup I use for this. It's one of the default brushes. It was actually created by the YouTuber Borodante. He's a Ukrainian YouTuber. He's extremely talented. His videos helped me improve quite a bit. But it's a brush that comes default with Art Studio Pro. He created it, and it's just got this really nice, you can't really see with that color. It's got this really nice texture, and it blends really nicely if you use the wet paint engine. Which is a thing that I believe pretty much only Art Studio Pro has, and I really like it. It allows things to blend very nicely, and it's not like a Photoshop brush that's kind of doesn't really blend at all. Yeah, it's a positive experience. So, but the way I'm going to be going through the process I did, first I'm going to be showing you just this picture and discussing why I made a lot of the decisions I did. Alright, so I'm also going to be showing the time lapse that comes pre-recorded on Art Studio Pro, and basically pausing it, zooming in, doing whatever I need to do to just kind of discuss how I went about doing what I did. So the first thing we're going to discuss is the actual basic composition of the piece. And this is actually not a super good composition for this piece. And I knew that going into it, so your question is probably, if you knew it was a bad composition, why did you do it? And the answer for that is Instagram. You see, this piece would be much better if it were much more vertical, if these side edges were cut in much closer. So there was kind of an equal distance around the whole character. That would not work very well on Instagram, and I would have to cut pieces of it off. So this is about as like tall and thin as an Instagram piece would get, and what I do is when I post it on other platforms, I crop it in at different amounts to make it a more cohesive composition. That is just like, because a person is tall and thin relatively, and Instagram likes things that are square or like kind of wider. Now, that's usually not a huge deal because generally you're drawing a person either interacting with an environment that takes up that horizontal space, or they're in some kind of a dynamic pose that takes up that horizontal space. But for a really simple, just standing still portrait like this, that's not something that needs to happen. Does that make sense? Or that's not something that would happen to make the tone feel right. So that's why the composition is the way it is. And composition, at least in terms of like placement on the canvas, is actually pretty negotiable throughout the whole process. If I bring up my quick menu here, which is tapping with 4 fingers, does 3 fingers work? No, it doesn't. That's redo. Which is tapping with 4 fingers. I have transform mapped straight to my quick select, which means, or my quick menu. So if I didn't like the composition, I could crop it in easily. And then obviously RStudio Pro also has a really good crop function that lets you both crop things in, and you can actually expand the canvas too, which is really nice. So I'm just going to undo all that. The only other thing that we really need to worry about before I start is the actual pose. In this case, the pose is not super complex, it's not super dynamic, and I need to make that clear. That is an artistic choice. That is not a lack of skill. I know how to make dynamic poses. I have made dynamic poses in the past. A lot of people get in this habit of drawing just people standing up, and they don't actually learn how to do more dynamic poses. That tends to lead to your drawings being stiffer and generally less interesting to look at. The other thing you might notice is that I need to clarify is I have my hand in my pocket in this. And once again, this is one of those things where it is often used as a shortcut. I don't want to draw hands, so I'm going to put them in the pocket. I did this because this is a self-portrait, and that is how I stand. I am the type of person that generally doesn't know what to do with my hands, so if I'm not actively using them, I keep them in my pockets. That is a character trait of mine that I am putting in the self-portrait. That being said, I know how to draw hands. I've done it before, and I've learned how to draw hands. If you are a beginner and you don't know how to draw hands, avoid putting them in a pocket. Avoid putting them behind a back or right out of frame, or even just doing like the mitten hands. Just what you got to do is take a break from whatever piece you're working on where you're struggling with hands. Go on Pinterest or whatever, get some hand references, and take 20 minutes to an hour just drawing hands. And draw all the different poses, and you can trace them. Tracing is okay as long as you're not trying to pass it off as your own work and you're only using it to learn. So trace away, redraw, red line, learn how to draw hands. It shouldn't take that long compared to the overall amount of time of your drawing. And that will be something you have in your arsenal forever once you learn how to do that, and you will no longer be like, I'm struggling with drawing hands. Alright, so that's everything we need to cover beforehand. Let's talk about the time lapse. It comes pre-done in RStudio Pro. We're going to be watching a faster version, and I'm just going to pause and rewind. RStudio Pro does let you export slower versions, but you can't watch them straight from the app. And this is almost a little mini RStudio Pro tutorial, just showing off some of the features. So I do want to try and do everything in the app because I think it is very underrated, and everybody uses Procreate when Procreate's not actually that good for digital painting. So we're just going to play... Nope. That's not the app's fault, that's my own fat fingers. So as you can see, it's only 3 minutes long. It's going to be a little longer for us because we're going to be pausing and restarting. But we're going to just start. This is just my sketch. So as you can see, nothing crazy. I kind of am able to bust this pose out. But you might see there is something you're going to see a lot, where it goes from a not very good pose, and it just kind of in one frame skips to a big good pose. That is because RStudio Pro has a tool in it called Elastify, which is basically the exact same thing as Photoshop's Liquify tool. And it just lets you push, pull, expand, shrink things kind of seamlessly. And it lets you just kind of move your proportions around without only distorting, if anything. You don't get any hard lines or edges where you very clearly move something around. And I did that, and that's what you see just then. So every time you see, RStudio Pro doesn't record like the different strokes you do in the Liquify tool, so it just looks like it suddenly transforms, Elastify tool rather. So whenever you see like proportions just randomly shift throughout this time lapse, that's what's happening. All right, let's keep looking. All right, so I'm just sketching out the clothes here. I started with like a satchel bag, but I don't really have one of those. So I figured I would just be holding my iPad Pro. I gave myself this kind of green like pseudo pea coat that I have in real life. And I just, right here, I'm just looking at my facial proportions, trying to nail my most obvious features. And this is actually, the tutorial is going to be a lot about how to make a portrait that actually looks like somebody, and specifically how to do a accurate self-portrait. And a lot of that is in character design rather than actual, like just getting every single little detail right. As you probably just saw, I laid down a really black, like a really dark color, and then it faded out into a more appropriate shade. I just did that with a multiply layer, and now I'm putting on a screen layer, and then I lower the opacity on both of those to make them more subtle, and to account for like air perspective and stuff. So you'll watch that happen. And this is kind of my base. It is a sketch that has been colored in and had some very preliminary shading done. And this is kind of the piece. This is what it's going to look like at this point. And then from this point forward, excuse me, from this point forward, it's just a matter of rendering, which is, in art, rendering is generally used to mean making it look like an actual material that exists in the real world. It has all sorts of meanings. Those of you who do video editing will think of rendering as kind of the final, your program kind of finalizing whatever video you're making and incorporating it all into one file. For people who are more familiar with 3D design, rendering is it is the program automatically making it look like a material that exists in the real world. So what we're doing is we're kind of doing the artistic version of that, where we're going through and making it look real. I can't actually zoom in. All right, if we zoom into the face here, I made it a goal of mine in this painting to put a lot of detail into the structure around the eye without making it look like I'm old or have like eye bags. So if we get back into the canvas recording here, skip to that part, you'll see that's kind of what I'm doing. I'll see if I can't crop in and post. So let's quickly talk about facial features and how to do a portrait that actually looks like somebody. And this is something that you see, this is a self-portrait or a portrait of somebody is almost always one of your first art projects in any kind of art. Like if you go to a public school and you have to take an art class for one reason or another, or you genuinely like art and you're taking beginner level art classes, you are almost always going to have to do a self-portrait. And you will find very quickly that even if you are good at drawing people, it is remarkably difficult to draw a portrait that looks like a specific people. So what do you do about that? In this case, what I do is I approach it the same way a caricature artist approaches a caricature. I don't think it's really up for debate whether or not this particular portrait is a caricature. I think it's pretty solidly not. The proportions are too close to real life for that to be the case. But what a caricature artist does, for those of you who don't know what a caricature is, I'll put one on screen. It's basically a highly stylized version of a person. What a caricature artist does is they look at somebody and they get two things. They get their most obvious features. In my case, that is things like small eyes, small, kind of close together eyes, a very pointy nose, especially for a guy, bigger lips, and a beard. Those are kind of my like defining facial features. My hair is a defining head shape feature, but it doesn't super define like my actual facial structure. It doesn't define that at all. The other thing that you look for in a person is, I'm going to just call it their vibe. It is the way in which they carry themselves, the way in which they dress, the way in which they emote that gives them a certain feeling. Now, this is really hard to establish for yourself, and this is where a lot of artistic stylization comes in. I went with, so a lot of people, for one reason or another, tell me I look like a teacher or like a professor. And it's a combination of the way I dress, the way I act, the way I do my hair, whatever. I have generally like educator vibes, and that's such a weird thing to say, but it's something that people have said about me enough that that's kind of the vibe I know I have. And if people don't tell you specifically what vibe you have, kind of find other people who you relate to and go with their vibe. And that's part of what I did here as well. Like that kind of like academia sort of look. In this particular part of the time lapse, I look much more stern than I finally end up looking. But that kind of skeptical expression is kind of my resting face, and it is part of that vibe. And that is an underrated part, in my opinion, of doing a portrait, because you can get, like, if I described my face to you and you drew it, you would probably get it wrong, even though, I got, high cheekbones, pointy nose, small eyes, big lips, long eyelashes, whatever. Honestly, you'd probably draw a girl if I gave you that description, but understanding how to combine what is physically there with what you emotionally understand about a person is what's really important to creating a portrait that doesn't just look like somebody but really feels like that person. So let's continue going here as I render out these facial features. You'll notice what I did here is I didn't actually render my beard. You can't really see it in this light because I don't have a very good webcam. But I do have a beard. It's not super heavy. It's kind of red, which is a different color from the rest of my hair. But it's not like a wispy, gross beard either. And so I didn't render it at first because I was focusing on the other things about my face, my lips and my mouth shape and my cheekbones and how those all interact together. And then once I get it done, then I come in, and the way I did the beard was I just basically took a very light reddish version of my hair color and I just started adding texture and reflecting the light the way that would actually reflect in real life. So as we move on here, we can zoom back out and we can start to look at the rest of the painting as I start to add textures to things and really figure out where these shadows are coming from. So if we give it a quick pause, we can see I have a bright light coming from in front of me, kind of a fill light. And then I have a very subtle blue rim light coming from presumably that fog below and behind me. And all that does is it just gives me a little bit of a secondary light source to help illuminate basically some of the details on my face only. But the light source coming from in front of me is coming a little bit from above, and all you need to remember about that is that generally things are going to become less saturated in the light, and highlights are going to be completely the color of the light. And they're going to tend to get more saturated in the shadow. Now I kind of stylized mine a little bit, and I made like the green on my coat a little bit more saturated and a little bit more yellow towards the light, because I'm assuming it's a yellow light, or a yellowish light, which would warm up the color a little bit more, and I cooled it off in the shadow. But that's not technically, if it were a white light, that isn't necessarily what you do, but I'm not necessarily drawing a white light, so that is something you have to learn mainly through experience. I will probably do a tutorial on how to do lighting effects in the future. As part of like a paint along. I'm planning kind of a cool painting that I will probably do a video on. So yeah, let's keep going and just watch how I render this. By this time, I've actually merged everything down into one layer as well, so it all blends nicely. There was another cut you saw there where I used the liquify tool to make it look more like my hand was resting in my pocket. And now it's just a bunch of kind of subtle changes, getting rid of those sketch lines, finishing up materials, generally making things look a little bit nicer. I used the soft light layer on the shirt to add a little bit of orange texture. I don't know if that's the technically correct layer to use. Oh, as we see here, this was where I made the decision to really push that stylized yellow light. You could have just seen, you probably just saw that it suddenly got a lot more saturated in the light. That was just, I was just working with it, and I thought that the color was looking a little too gray and monochrome, so I added that yellow light, and I think that the warm greens in the jacket contrast really nicely with the cool blues in the background. Alright, let's keep looking. You can see I add a little bit of that rim light, and then I think I take it away mostly later, and have it just be very subtle. I smooth out the hand in the pocket to make it look a little bit more natural. And it's still, honestly, that's probably the weakest part of the image, that kind of bulge in the pocket, but that's okay. Let's actually zoom in here on these buttons. They're not going to be super detailed. But it's important that you'll notice I align them not only with the direction of the jacket, but also with the angle that they're being held at. So they're not perfectly facing you, so they're not perfectly round. They're very oval shaped. And then you will also notice that I just used a little trick of putting a smaller highlight on the inside kind of shape there to make them look like they're a button shape. And it saved me from having to render the whole button. It reads nicely as a button with just those two highlights without having to go through and like really render all the different planes of basically. The way I would define a button is like a torus, like a donut shape with the flat plane on the bottom. Anyways, let's keep watching. So I just rendered that hand slightly, and let's zoom in on that iPad now. You can see, even though the iPad is black, it's very reflective. So I had it reflecting both the green jacket and the white fog of the sky, as well as a little bit of my hand. And that's just, like, that hand pose is real basic. That's like you're kind of just seeing the fingertips. But it's important to keep things like that in mind of if you're making a shiny material, it better reflect things. And the shinier the material, like a touchscreen, the more reflective it's going to be. Alright, so we're approaching the end here. I'm just finalizing the image a little bit more, doing a little bit of just making sure the shapes are nice, adding texture where it belongs. And at the very end of everything, a fun tip for Instagram that I did not know about until I watched, I believe it was an Ergo Josh video, where he was talking about how he didn't know about it. And I don't know why nobody knows about it, but hopefully with the Ergo Josh video, more people are going to know about it. If you put a sharpen filter on your drawings, it keeps Instagram from squishing them as bad and making them as blurry. Because I'll put up a screenshot right now of what Instagram did to my poor Mothman piece. It's just because it's so dark, it got compressed and blurry. Yeah, but a sharpen filter helps with that. All right, so that is kind of the basis of this piece. There's not too much else to it. In the future, I think I'm going to do more of these videos because they're not scripted and they're easier to record kind of quickly, and I can do them on the pieces I've already made as well as talking you through pieces as I make them. I will probably actually live stream, I think, some painting. So I will put the link to my Twitch in the description below, and you guys, if you so choose, can go subscribe to that and get notified when I live stream. And that way you guys can ask me questions as I do it and help me decide on solutions to these kinds of problems and really interact. Again, link to the art Discord server where you can do similar things is in the description below. The only other thing is I challenge you as kind of homework to draw a self-portrait. And what we're going to do is in, let's say, 1 year, or after you watch all of these videos, if you're watching them after they're published. But I'm going to make a series of videos like this, and we're going to walk through learning and improving our digital painting together. And if you're a beginner, this will help you through that. And if you are more advanced, there's some techniques for more advanced users as well. And we are going to work together. And at the end, I'll redo this portrait, you guys redo yours, and that'll be your homework for today, is keep an eye out for improving and do a self-portrait, and then keep an eye out, and we will work, and hopefully in 1 year, actually not even 1 year, I'll say by November 1st, which is National Self-Portrait Day, we will do another one of these and see how we've improved. All right. Thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, share, all the YouTuber stuff. Subscribe to my Twitch so you can help me with these live streams in the future. Join the art Discord if you are within the right age range. And our only rule pretty much is be nice to everyone and no erotic art. That doesn't mean that's not like no tasteful nude art or anything. But you can't, we had somebody come in who was like a hentai artist, and you can't be doing that. That's our only rule, basically. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I will see you, hopefully, in the next one. I have some neat things planned. Adios.